Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a real clinical mystery. It's a scenario that completely upends everything you might have learned about grading the severity of heart conditions. We're going to explore a fascinating case where the numbers on a medical report simply don't match up with the reality of what a patient is actually experiencing. So, what happens when the standard math of medicine literally lies to us? Let's dive in and find out.
Picture this. You've got a patient who comes in completely breathless at rest. You look at their echocardiogram and it shows moderate aortic stenosis. Now, on its own, that isn't severe and we wouldn't typically act on it. But the same patient also has moderate aortic regurgitation. Again, on its own, not severe, not actionable. So we're looking at two moderate lesions that individually shouldn't be causing major issues. But here is the catch, and it's a big one. This patient is highly symptomatic. How on earth do two moderate lesions suddenly equal severe, debilitating disease?
Well, this is the core of the problem we are tackling today. There is this massive disconnect between what we see on paper and what we see in reality. On paper, sure, you've got two isolated, reassuringly moderate lesions. But right in front of you, in reality, is a breathless, highly symptomatic patient with a ventricle that is visibly failing. And the reason this happens is because, historically, we've graded these two lesions as if they exist in entirely separate hearts. But obviously they don't. They exist in the exact same left ventricle at the exact same time.
We call this the hemodynamic trap. With mixed aortic valve disease, that poor ventricle is battling on two fronts simultaneously. Because of the aortic stenosis, that obstructed forward flow, the ventricle has to generate a massive amount of pressure just to push blood out. That's a serious pressure overload. But at the same time, because of the aortic regurgitation, the backward flow, the ventricle is constantly being flooded with extra volume. So this thickened left ventricle is fighting a pressure battle and a volume battle all at once. The combined workload produces incredibly real myocardial strain, even if each individual lesion only grades as moderate. Think of it like trying to pump water out of a highly kinked hose while someone else is simultaneously pouring water right back down the spout. It's exhausting.
Now, before we go any further, we really need to get our definitions straight because these are two very different problems hiding under one general label. First, we have mixed valvular disease. This is when stenosis and regurgitation are coexisting at the exact same valve, just like the mixed aortic valve disease we were just talking about. Then we have multiple valvular disease. This means two or more different valves are acting up simultaneously. Think aortic stenosis happening right alongside mitral regurgitation. But here is why we are grouping them together today. Both scenarios share the exact same trap. In both situations, standard single-valve severity grading completely breaks down.
Because while single-valve issues are complex and create intense localized pressure and volume overload, multi-valve disease, that introduces multi-chamber chaos. When multiple valves are diseased, let's say the aortic, mitral, and tricuspid valves all have issues, these competing lesions create wildly unpredictable flow patterns. The burden doesn't just sit politely in the left ventricle, no, it backs up into the left atrium, causing pulmonary venous congestion, and then it pushes all the way back into the right heart, causing systemic venous congestion. You absolutely cannot just sum up these isolated reports and call it a day. And here is where it gets truly dangerous. These lesions don't just add to each other's burden, sometimes they actively lie to us. This brings us to the masking effect. This happens when one lesion actively hides the true severity of another, making our standard grading thresholds completely 100% misleading. A seemingly mild problem might actually be incredibly severe, it's just being cloaked by a second lesion.
Let me walk you through how that deception actually works. Imagine you have significant mitral stenosis upstream. That narrowed opening restricts the forward flow of blood from the left atrium down into the left ventricle, right? Well, because less blood is getting into the ventricle, less blood is being pushed out through the aortic valve. That reduced flow artificially lowers the pressure gradient across the aortic valve. So, if that aortic valve actually has severe stenosis, the low flow makes it look like it's only moderate. The upstream mitral lesion is actively hiding the genuine severity of the downstream aortic lesion. It's a total trick.
Which really begs the question, if this masking effect and these hemodynamic traps are so dangerous, why was there an evidence gap for so long? Why are we just figuring out the rules? Well, it all comes down to the nature of clinical trials. Randomized controlled trials need clean, homogeneous populations to give us solid data, but the endless combinations of multi-valve disease made forming those clean groups a total nightmare. There's just too much heterogeneity. So for years, our only option was to kind of extrapolate single-valve rules and rely heavily on pure clinical judgment.
Section, the 2025 breakthrough.
rewriting the rules for mixed valve disease. The new guidelines are finally giving us a much-needed paradigm shift.
And it all comes down to a few very specific, highly actionable numbers. In the 2025 ESC/EATS guidelines, the first crucial new Class 1 threshold is 40. Under these guidelines, a combined mean transvalvular gradient of 40 millimeters of mercury or greater now definitively indicates intervention for mixed aortic valve disease. We are no longer waiting around for either the stenosis or the regurgitation to cross a severe threshold all by itself. We are finally looking at the combined gradient burden.
The second magic number here is 4. A peak velocity of 4 meters per second or greater is the alternative trigger for intervention. And listen, here is the absolute most critical part of this new guidance. These triggers apply even if the calculated aortic valve area is technically greater than 1 square centimeter, which, in the past, would have completely ruled out severe isolated stenosis. The 2025 ESC/EACTS guidelines are explicitly giving us permission to intervene based on what the combined lesions are actually doing to the heart together. It's a real game changer. So let's break down exactly how to apply these new numbers in practice to definitively solve our initial mystery. Remember our breathless patient with 2 moderates from the beginning of this explainer? If a patient is symptomatic and they hit that mean gradient of 40 or that peak velocity of 4, intervention is recommended as a Class 1 indication. It's really that simple. But what if they're asymptomatic? Well, the guidelines answer that too. For asymptomatic patients, intervention is recommended if their left ventricular ejection fraction falls below 50% without another identifiable cause. This framework perfectly helps us avoid that old trap of isolated grading.
But listen, numbers alone just aren't enough when you're dealing with a system as complex as the human heart. To completely avoid this single valve trap, we have to rely on integrative whole heart diagnostics. You've got to weigh symptom status heavily. If a patient is highly limited but the lesions look moderate, that's a massive red flag, not a reassurance. We need to trend left ventricular and atrial size over time because progressive remodeling tells us way more than a single snapshot ever could. We increasingly need to utilize cardiac CT and MRI for that flow-independent anatomical data, which is perfect for bypassing that sneaky masking effect we talked about. And finally, employ functional stress assessments to unmask symptoms that a resting study might just completely miss.
So how do we actually do this? Here is your actionable step-by-step game plan for tackling these complex presentations. Step 1. Characterize each lesion independently. Understand its mechanism and look closely to see if it might be masking something else. Step 2. Assess the combined ventricular burden. Look at the chamber as one whole system, not 2 separate scorecards. Step 3. Apply the new 2025 combined thresholds where they exist, rather than defaulting to those old isolated cutoffs. And Step 4. Mandate a comprehensive heart team evaluation. With this level of complexity, you absolutely need multidisciplinary input to plan the best strategy.
Which brings us to our final defining question. When you are looking at an echocardiogram showing 2 moderate lesions sitting right side by side, what is your focus? Are you treating the valve or are you treating the ventricle? Because the truth is, the heart doesn't grade its valves in isolation. It feels the combined weight, the pressure, and the volume all at once. And thanks to these massive breakthroughs in how we understand mixed valvular disease, we shouldn't either. It's time to abandon that isolated single valve math and completely embrace whole heart hemodynamics. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this completely changes how you look at the hidden complexities of the human heart.